Good morning. Welcome to the 43rd Annual International MUFON Symposium. This morning, we're not going to waste any time, but we're going to get the ball rolling with T.L.Keller. So please let me welcome to the stage T.L.Keller.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Where's everybody? Instead of 200 or so people, we should have thousands of people wanting to come to this symposium. Don't you all agree? All right. You're probably wondering, who am I? My name is T.L.Keller. I'm a retired aerospace engineer and radio talk show host, believe it or not. But more importantly, I'm the author of the Total Novices Guide to UFOs. We'll be talking about this a little bit later on. First of all, I would like to thank Dave McDonald for inviting me here. I'm delighted to be present. I'd also like to thank Jan Harzan. Jan, are you in the audience? No? You want to stand up and say hello there? I'd like to thank Jan because much of my second part of the presentation would not have been possible without his help. He is the State Assistant Director for California, and he heads up the Orange County, California MUFON chapter. I'd also like to thank Open Minds Magazine and the Art of Close Encounters. Now, is John Rao here? John? Well, he is in attendance at this meeting. John Rao's team at Open Minds Magazine has been very helpful in my presentation, and some of the artwork that you'll be seeing came from their magazine. To my way of thinking, Open Minds Magazine is the premier UFO magazine. I've never seen anything better than that. The other book that I would like to mention is The Art of Close Encounters by Kim Carlsberg. And she also has allowed me to use some of her images from her excellent book, which is about 350 pages and printed in full color, and it's quite unusual. Now, the title of my presentation, following the theme, is Extraterrestrials, Friends or Foes, or Trading Partners, perhaps. These are the topics that I'm going to be covering. And by the way, when I talk about extraterrestrials, I'm talking about a generic classification. The standard ETs, I'm talking about interdimensional beings, time travelers, even indigenous alien species here on this planet now. Are they all our friends? We'll be talking about the case for friends, the case for neutrals, and the case for foes. The second part of my presentation will begin with the Ben Rich Lectures, which started in 1992 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, not too far from here, and the second presentation of his at UCLA in 1993. I'll be talking about the S4 facility in Nevada, the S4 whistleblowers, something called Space Patrol, and then if I have enough time, I will summarize that. Now, to give you a little bit of idea of my background, when I was 8 years old, around 1949, 1950, I had a favorite television program. It was called Space Patrol. Does anyone remember that at all? There's one person in the back. Hey, this was terrific for an 8-year-old. It told a story of a military crew that in a rocket ship zipped around this part of the galaxy, rescuing spacefarers in distress and chasing bad guys. And at the time, I thought it was wonderful. I also read at about the same time a number of science fiction novels by Asimov, Sturgeon, and Heinlein, and others. And this opened my mind and imagination to its outer limits, believe me. Now, I used to work for Mobil Oil Corporation in New York City at their world headquarters. And every once in a while during the lunch break, I would walk down to Times Square and people watch. And if you pick 57 people from that crowd, and I use that number for a specific reason, you will find that some of them are very friendly, even in New York City and Times Square. They will give you directions. If you hold out your hat, they might even give you $1. Honestly. Others are neutral. They're indifferent. If you say hello to them, they'll just walk right on by. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have those who will pick your pocket, or worse. So, are they all our friends? The answer in the case of Times Square is no, they're not. Well, here's an assortment of extraterrestrial beings. This is from Kim Carlsberg's book, The Art of Close Encounters, and we asked our same question. Are they all our friends? I've tried to simplify this from my point of view. I use sort of a stop sign. Up in the upper right-hand corner here, the stop sign basically is green for smiley faces. I call that type A. Type B are those that are neutral. And type C are the frowny faces. I call that type C. You judge a friendly ET by how they behave. Who are they? What do they want? And from whose viewpoint are they being judged? Now let me just take a little bit of ET behavior that we've been experiencing over decades. For the type A's, I would say those that have tried to communicate with experiencers, and only communicate, say by telepathy or whatever, are the most friendly. There are those that have engaged in altruistic and a very loving and spiritual intent. The type B's are those I would consider personally that have overflown our nuclear storage sites and our nuclear energy facilities. They've abducted cattle and other livestock. They've abducted experiencers. And even in type B, at one extreme of that part of the spectrum, they've created a hybridization program and Earth colonies. Now, I know that this sounds pretty far out, but I would say the type C's are those who have quarantined this planet. They're the ones from wherever who may have simply said, don't go to this planet. They're too brutal. They're too violent. They haven't achieved the minimum level of spiritual development. So maybe we haven't seen them yet. And then there are those who, let's say world domination. And these are the most unfriendly. Now, I realize fully that there's some people here who will find what I'm about to say unacceptable because it's unbelievable. And I know that. Others will say, well, I can accept what he says over here, but this is over the top. And then the rest of you will say, well, I've known this all along. In my radio interviews, I interviewed a lady by the name of Kat King. She is from the Orange County, California MUFON chapter. These are her illustrations. She gave me permission to use them. At age 18, I believe it was, she and her family were in Big Bear, California. It's a mountain resort. She wandered into the woods, and she was confronted by these beings on the left, the classic sort of praying mantis. And after her fear subsided, she found out that this was a very loving and highly spiritual experience. There was nothing more than friendliness that she encountered. And she says that she was taken onto a craft, and she was taken into the command center. Then I had lunch with a Mr. X. I met him in Palm Springs, California, actually just March of this year. And he said at age 8, he was abducted by a bug and also some small grays. The drawing on the left is by Mr. X. He said it was an insectoid that was wearing a type of helmet that looked like the crown of Egypt, Upper Egypt, I should say. In the lower right-hand corner, this is Tutmosis III, and this was basically identical to what he saw, except it had a faceplate on the front. And on the back side, it had scales. Now, some of you will say, well, gee, that's not a very large sample size. Those are only 2 people. I accept that. Here's my radio interview with Barbara Lamb, also of the Orange County, California chapter. She is a marriage and family counselor and a hypnotherapist. She has done regressions on over 800 experiencers. So for this presentation, I asked her, Barbara, what are the most friendly beings that you have ever heard described? And she said, the radiant light beings. Nothing but love and spiritualism. That's all. So I said, well, at the opposite end of the spectrum, who are the most unfriendly that you've come across? And she said, some of the reptilians and reptoids. This probably isn't too much of a surprise. And then I said, well, what about all of the other beings? And she says, oh, those are the neutrals. They're in the neutral part of the spectrum. Dr. David Jacobs wrote a book called The Threat a number of years ago. And his conclusion, after all of the regressions that he had had, plus I believe some of the regressions that Bud Hopkins had had, his conclusion was they were out for world domination. Now, he presented last year at our chapter a presentation showing the hierarchy of authority aboard abduction craft. In his opinion, it's the insectoids that were at the top of the pecking order. He didn't know where the reptilians actually should be placed because he said there were so many different types of variants. So that's why it's in blue here with a question mark, and that's exactly how he represented it. And then he said, well, the next one down were the tall gray aliens, the small grays, the early stage hybrids, and on down, as you can see. Well, that's David Jacobs' opinion. And last year I had the opportunity to ask him. I said, David, you wrote this book, The Threat, years and years ago. Have you moderated your opinion in any way? And he said, not at all. It's even worse than I thought. Let's take a look at woo! That happens every time I give a talk. I don't know why. Let's take a look at these extraterrestrials, type A's. Who are they? Well, this is what Barbara Lamb calls the radiant light beings. She said sometimes they appear as stars and sometimes they're sort of ovals. Sometimes they're just orbs. Type B, in my opinion, would be the tall grays, the Nordics, and the reptilians, the type B reptilians. Incidentally, this drawing over on the left is a drawing that was made by Captain Bill Uhouse. We'll be talking about him a little bit later on. That particular being was known as J-Rod. The type Cs, and like I say, this is not just my opinion, would be certain types of generic reptilians, reptoids, dracos, serpents, the quarantiners, once again, and the world dominators. This is what I would consider to be the friend-foe spectrum. Over on the left, you have the benevolence, the type As, the radiant lights. On the far right, you have the malevolence, the type C reptilians, the quarantiners, if there's such a thing, and the world dominators. And in the middle, you have the tall grays, the ebens, the extraterrestrial biological entities, specifically in this case, J-Rod. And then to the right of that would be the type B reptilians, insectoids, Nordics, hybrids, and what have you. Point being, there's an entire spectrum of the beings that have been visiting Earth for a very long time. Now let's take a look at type Bs. Why are they here? Most of you probably saw the film Avatar. In that case, humans were depicted as the aggressor going to another planet so that they could mine unobtainium. In other words, a mineral which was not available on Earth. Isn't it possible that they might be coming here for that purpose? I mean, after all, Zecharia Sitchin said that the Anunnaki came here for gold. Yesterday, someone in this audience informed me that she has some knowledge that some extraterrestrials may be here for deep underground oil. I'm not talking about fossilized crude oil. I'm talking about a substance similar to oil. If you've never heard that before, you heard it first here. They might be trading partners. Here's a photograph, let's say, of a human using alien technology. And then there's the subject of colonization and hybridization. The drawing on the right is from Kim Carlsberg's book. This is entitled The Great Room. And the witness is in the bottom part of this through a fisheye lens, so to speak. These are beds where pregnant females are lying and their fetuses are being removed. Does that necessarily make them type Cs? I would say not necessarily. And maybe all of the above is true here. Now here's my point. Still talking about type Bs. It's my opinion that we have engaged in a trading partnership with the Ebens, the type B Ebens, the type that has been referred to as J-Rod. And they have provided us with their anti-gravity technology and given it to the U.S. military. This happens to be General Nathan Twining, who appeared, he was MJ4, I think, appeared on the front cover of Time magazine. In exchange for this technology, what I'm suggesting is that we have built deep underground military bases similar to this photograph here, or underground, or underwater, I should say, bases located possibly in who knows where, and they're secured by our own U.S. military. That's quite a statement. Maybe I have some proof of that. Maybe not. This is the photograph of Bob Lazar. I know many of you feel that he was a hoaxer. Maybe a government agent. I met Bob Lazar about 20 years ago out in Rachel, Nevada. Excuse me. And he was a very young, technically astute young man. He was shy, he was reserved, he didn't seem to want any publicity, and he seemed to be telling the truth. He said he was hired on, in part, by Dr. Edward Teller, the father of the H-bomb, to retro-engineer extraterrestrial craft at the S4 facility in Nevada. Here's a photograph in the lower left-hand corner of Captain Bill Uhouse. Bill Uhouse was a mechanical engineer, and his claim is that he was hired on at S4 to design, develop, and install a flight simulator for flying discs. And he claimed that he had fairly regular meetings with Dr. Edward Teller and the Eben called J-Rod. J-Rod, according to him, was a technician who advised them as to how to best approach the anti-gravity topic. The diagram is a diagram which represents a flight simulator for a flying disc. It was mounted on a 12-foot pylon, and it had a 3-foot ball bearing. And basically, this simulator rotated around that ball bearing. The trainee entered, the door closed. These mounts, or walkways, I guess you'd call them. I don't know if you can see that, but not very well. Well, there it is. These walkways would retract, and this simulator would could be rotated and set at angles. Another alternate viewpoint about our trading partners was the story from Dr. Dan Burrish. You see here a photograph of our old friend Bill Hamilton. And Dan Burrish's story was that he claimed to be a microbiologist that was hired on at S4 to perform a study of the J-Rod being. Now I'd like to get our feet back down on the ground and talk about Lockheed Martin Skunk Works, to make sure that everyone here understands what that is. This is a photograph of a big box of a building in Palmdale, California. It's on the Sierra Highway that you see here, and this is the home now of the Lockheed Skunk Works. The original director of the Skunk Works was Kelly Johnson here, and he was the mentor to his deputy, who was Ben Rich. Now, the Lockheed Martin Skunk Works have been the designers, developers, fabricators, and testers of any number of advanced aircraft. This is the U-2, for example. This is the SR-71. That's the Lockheed F-104 Starfighter. And this is the drawing of the Aurora, which Ben Rich mentioned in passing at one point. This is a photograph of Ben Rich. Last night, Nick Pope mentioned the F-117 Nighthawk and whether we would be able to have designed and built something like this if this were 200 years ago or so. Ben Rich wrote The Skunk Works. I'm going to talk about two lectures. In September 1992, he gave a lecture at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And in March 1993, he gave also a lecture at UCLA. Now, the lecture at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was just what you would expect. A number of slides, that were about the Lockheed Corporation and Lockheed Martin and all of the various aircraft that they had built. And it was exactly what you'd expect, except for the last slide. In the last slide, Ben Rich, who was the former then president of Lockheed Skunk Works, said, as his last statement, Lockheed Martin has just received a contract from the Air Force to take E.T. home. And at that point, everybody broke into laughter. Big joke. Now, Ben Rich could have shown the starship from the film E.T., or the starship from the Alien film, or something that had actually been on the drawing boards a number of years before, the Daedalus Project or Project Orion. But he didn't use any of those designs. Does anyone know what his final slide was? No? A black disc. That's right. It was a black flying disc headed towards a very prominent star in the background. Why did he show that? A few months later, in March 1993, he gave another lecture at UCLA. My friend Jan over here told me that, well, someone from Lockheed Martin was going to be giving a history of Lockheed Corporation and the Skunk Works. I said, great. Who's speaking? Jan said, Ben Rich. And I said, who is he? I had no idea. Well, this is speculation, and I will point that out. But I believe that something happened in Ben Rich's life between September of 92 and March of 1993 because the lecture at UCLA was very, very different. Now, any of you can watch Ben Rich speak at the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Any of you. You can order this video from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base and view it. But the only thing you'll see is that black disc. Now we're going to talk about the UCLA lecture a few months later. He started off with the sort of standard illustrations of the Lockheed Corporation, just like he did at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And then he said, if you can imagine it, Lockheed Martin has done it. Well, you know, for an 8-year-old who had a big imagination, I was all over the universe at that point, if you can imagine. Just to make sure that everyone heard that, he repeated that twice again during his lecture. And then he said, how do we get to the stars? How do we get to the stars? And he answered his own question. He said, not by using rockets and chemical propellants. We'll never get there. He said, we have to have a totally new technology. He showed some more slides. And then he said, rather alarmingly, at least for me, Lockheed Martin now has a technology that would be the new technology to go to the stars. He continued on his presentation until his last slide. And then this is similar to his last slide. I have recreated it, and frankly, I have colorized it because my book is in full color. But this is what he showed. Quite clearly, a flying disc. And then he said, who knows what Lockheed Martin will be working on next? Was he just blowing smoke? I don't think so. I think he would have loved to have told us the truth, but he said he didn't want to be sent to Fort Leavenworth. Now, can you handle the truth? This recording that I have was Jim Goodall, a very close friend of Ben Rich. Jim Goodall is an aviation author, lecturer, and aircraft restorer. In fact, this is a photograph of him in the process of restoring an SR-71. And he claims to have talked to Ben Rich during his last days. Now, listen to what he says. And by the way, there's some narratives that will be spelled out. They go very fast. You'll have to read fast in order to get it. I didn't create this video.
A dear friend of mine was named Ben R. Rich. He replaced Kelly Johnson at the Lockheed Skunk Works. And about 10 days before he died, I was speaking to Ben, but he told me, he said, Jim, we have things out in the desert that are 50 years beyond what you can comprehend. They have about 4,500 people at the Lockheed Skunk Works. What have they been doing for the last 20 some odd years?
Like I say, I did not create that. If you'll notice, during the last narrative, it said it sourced this information from an article that was in the May 2010 edition of the MUFON UFO Journal. Only part of what was said there came from that article. I know because I wrote it. Now, there's an important thing here that I would like to specifically point out. It was mentioned in the video, but let me just sort of repeat it so everyone gets this. At the end of the Ben Rich lecture, Jan Harzan and I stayed on until the end, until the last people finally left. And Jan followed Ben Rich to the side door, the exit door. And Jan asked Ben Rich, "How do UFOs work?" And Ben Rich said, "Well, tell me, how does ESP work?" And Jan thought about it for a few seconds, and he said, "Well, I suppose ESP works because everything in the universe is connected." And Ben Rich said, "That's how UFOs work." And he walked out the door. Jan, do you have anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Well, he also said that there's an error in the equation, and we figured out what it is, and that's how it works.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately, he didn't say which equations.
We asked him which equations he would.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, he basically said that Ben Rich said that there was an error in the equations. And Ben Rich didn't say which equations. We weren't sure whether we're talking about Einstein or Maxwell or whatever. But he said they had found an error. This was at the Skunk Works, apparently. And they had taken advantage of that knowledge. I'm sure Jan would be happy to answer any questions you might have about the Ben Rich lecture at UCLA. Now, I used to live and work in the Antelope Valley in California. The Antelope Valley is where Edwards Air Force Base is located, where the Lockheed Skunk Works is located, Northrop Grumman, any number of other aircraft companies, aerospace companies, have facilities there. There are a number of secret facilities, which are not known to most people. These are called RCS facilities. Those are radar cross-section facilities. And in the past, they would use this facility to test stealthiness of various aircraft designs. Now, this is the one that is called the Anthill, and it's on the Tejon Ranch in the foothills of the Tehachapis. What they do is they mount a model or a full-size aircraft design on a pylon, and then here they have some various types of radar which they fire these signals to, and they detect what the bounce back is, basically. And if you don't have any bounce back, then you have a very stealthy design. Well, since I used to live in Palmdale, I met someone by the name of Gary Schultz and Norio Hayakawa at a UFO conference in Los Angeles years and years ago. They said that they would take us out to secret facilities where they're manufacturing flying discs. I said, "Great, take me there, wherever it is." And lo and behold, it was where I lived. It was right in front of my nose, and I didn't know about it because these facilities are way out in the sticks. He took us there on one occasion, and we could get up to, somewhere about in here, and then we ran into the guard gate. But you can actually fly over this facility, and I've done so. And what you have is that you have these diamonds here. If you can see, there's one over here and one over here and one up here. And supposedly they're just concrete pads to support these pylons. But on the day that I happened to fly over the Tejon RCS facility, I believe it was this one was actually opened up. It was like a ICBM blast door on the top. It was fully open, and you could, in principle, see down inside, which was obviously dark, but the point being is, that one had a retractable door. Now, one night, Gary Schultz, and that is he on the right with the tie, saw this taking place at the Northrop Grumman facility at the Tejon Ranch. A flying disc was being launched from that particular site where the doors were open. Believe it or not, that's what he saw. And I had absolutely no reason to disbelieve him. Now this is a photograph of what I call the night lights near Area 51. The night lights didn't come from Groom Lake, they came from Papoose Lake. It's about 12 miles south of Groom Lake. As I mentioned, I met Bob Lazar about 20 years ago. This is he in the white shirt. And he told me that if I went out to the fence that surrounds Area 51 on a Wednesday night, beginning at about 8 o'clock, that there was a fair chance of seeing this kind of demonstration. Bright reddish-orange lights that do not fly in a normal flight path. It's a jagged flight path, irregular. I've been out to Area 51 to see these numerous times. I've actually lost count. But I have seen this very same thing myself. And they go up, they go down, they go left, they go right, and they appear to be in unpredictable behavior. One morning, or I should say one Wednesday night, Jan and I were out there, and absolutely nothing happened. I had my camper out there, and we were night watching, and nothing appeared to be unusual whatsoever, except a certain security guard that came up from behind us and asked what we were doing. Jan said, "Well, we're stargazing," and then he walked on. The next morning, he and I were looking south towards Las Vegas. And at about 45 degrees up, suddenly, and this is in broad daylight, by the way, 6 in the morning, broad daylight, a very bright object appeared at about 40 degrees up. It looks sort of like those star shells that were shooting off last night, if anyone saw them. They're very white and bright in daylight. And this object took a jagged flight path and gradually landed behind Papoose Mountain. Now, Jan saw one, I believe. My recollection is there were 3 that came in a period of 10 minutes. To me, they were coming back from a mission. That was the last time I was out there because I didn't feel that I needed to see anything more. I was convinced. Now, Gary Schultz took this photograph on one of our expeditions. Gary had a paralyzed left arm, but he did have a very small camera, film camera with high-speed film. And Gary's idea was to take photographs of just anything in the sky that looked strange. So he was always out there taking these pictures. Now this is a push-processed film which has been, I know it's a little bit on the grainy side, but it's pretty clearly a flying disc. This appeared to be a hovering, flashing red light at the time. But in the development, this is what came out. And this was over the Tikaboo Valley, not over Papoose Mountain. The Tikaboo Valley basically runs along the Nellis Gunnery and Bombing Range. Now here's my disclaimer about this subject. I don't know if these three whistleblowers were telling the truth or not. Having met Bob Lazar personally, I'm convinced that he was brought in to work on propulsion systems. And my feeling is, my sense is that if he didn't work at S4, he knew somebody that did. Because who would know that if you're out there at night on Wednesday nights at 8 o'clock or thereafter, they would be testing these devices. The other one was Bill Uhouse, Captain Bill Uhouse, now deceased. He was the flight simulator mechanical engineer. And Dr. Dan Burish, microbiology. Now, someone has suggested that, well, maybe not all of them are telling the truth. I mean, I'll just, as an example, maybe Dr. Dan Burish is not really a doctor. Maybe he was simply taking some of the stories from Lazar and Captain Bill Uhouse and making up his own. I don't know. All I do know is that Michael Schratt, formerly of Open Minds magazine, has followed the Dan Burish story extensively, and he just has come up against a brick wall. Can't go any further. And what I'm asking you to do is this. If you have any first-hand knowledge of the S4 facility, please come to my vendor table. I will take down the information, and I will pass it on to Michael Schratt, who is an aerospace historian. Now let's talk about S4 itself. This is a photograph of Michael Schratt. He was the artist who created these Nix drawings. These were shown 2 years ago at the International UFO Congress. And based upon Dan Burish's representation. This is what it looked like from the heliport. You had to walk between the two blue lines. There were 9 hangars buried back under the mountain, as you can see. It's heavily guarded, according to Dan Burish. This was the entry area. There was a very long hallway, as you can see. On the left, we're told that there was an avionics facility, avionics lab, and a propulsion lab. In other parts of the facility, there's also a weapons lab as well. According to what Michael told me, you walk down this hallway and enter on one of the doors on the left, and you come out onto a catwalk. In the first hangar was what Dan Burish called the sport model. Where have we heard that before? Well, this is exactly what Bob Lazar called it 20 years ago. Hangar 2 was empty. Hangar 3 had the Roswell craft. Now, it's shown here with a tarp over it. I would assume that that's because it was damaged. This is an artist illustration by Jim Nichols of the Roswell crash. Hangar 4, this was the Orion craft. Have any of you seen an illustration of this before? No? The drawing in the upper left-hand corner appeared in Bill Cooper's book a number of years ago. It's shown here. It's entitled, Behold a Pale Horse. It is still available on the bookshelves, or it can be ordered. But the book included this drawing, which was by Mark McCandlish. He wasn't identified as the artist at the time in the book, but that's who did it. And this was a representation of what an alien reproduction vehicle looked like. and it was also known as the flux liner. The illustration on the right is a combination of work from Michael Schratt and Mark McCandlish. This illustration appeared, some while back in Open Minds magazine. If you take a look at this, there's a space for 4 crew. These are oxygen tanks. This is a very large capacitor. This is a remote manipulating arm, as if it's intended to travel in space and pick up something or drop something off. And this is obviously the propulsion system. And from what I understand, this contained ions of mercury. Hangar 6 was what was referred to as the Roswell alien reproduction vehicle. The claim was that Lockheed Martin used the F-22 Raptor, which is a air superiority fighter, for those who may not know. And according to the story, they removed the vertical stabilizers, took out the jet engines, replaced it with a reproduced propulsion system, and that is what this appeared to be. Since it was Lockheed Martin, it wouldn't be too much of a problem for them to do that. Hangar 7 was said to be the Kingman craft. The Kingman craft was supposedly damaged, and that's why it has a tarp over it, presumably. This is a artist's illustration of what some claim that the Kingman crash looked like. In Hangar 8 was what they called the licorice drop. It was a triangular, pyramidal shaped craft, highly polished, black, highly reflective, mirror-like, they said. Has anyone ever seen or heard of something like this? Couldn't hear that. Rendlesham? Did someone say that? Oh. 1980, Rendlesham Forest. I don't know if anyone's speaking on that topic, but they should. There was a device that was said to have landed outside of an U.S. Air Force base, and a Colonel Halt and a large crew were sent out with lights at night, and they made recordings. There was a very black mirrored surface, triangular, pyramidal shaped craft there. I'm not saying it's the same one that was reported to be at S4, but it's the same style, put it that way. Now, let's get back to Space Patrol. Again, when I was 8 years old, this was one of my favorite programs. 1949, 1950. This is Commander Buzz Corey, and this is Cadet Happy. I'm sorry no one remembers that. I guess maybe I'm one of the oldest in this audience. But anyway, as I said, they were a military group, and they chased bad guys and rescued other people. Now what happened, this was in 1950. Now this is an illustration from the film Forbidden Planet, which came out around 1955. And as I said, in Space Patrol they had rocket ships. But in 1955 they had space cruisers, disc-shaped space cruiser. Let me ask you, what happened between, say, 1950 and 1955 that would have changed from rocket ships to flying discs? Anyone like to guess? No guessers? Hey, I'm glad you're awake. Thank you for being here. Sure. In 1952, it was a small fleet of flying discs that circled Washington, D.C. 1952. It created a great stir at the Pentagon, and President Truman was not very happy about that. When the flying disc continued on, they sent up 2 Lockheed F-94 interceptors to intercept them. I don't know what they're trying to do, but intercept them. Basically, when the F-94s got up into the air, the flying disc left. Then the F-94s landed. The discs came back. 2 more F-94s were sent up. Needless to say, they never caught them. Yesterday, I heard from George Filer. George, are you here? No? I heard from George Filer that one of those Lockheed F-94s crashed. News to me. All right, let's bring Space Patrol up to date, if we may. This is the emblem of the Naval Space Command. This comes right from the Navy. Look it up. That's what they call themselves, the Naval Space Command. And of course, the Air Force doesn't want to be outdone, so there's an Air Force Space Command. Now, take a look at this. You see this emblem here? It's sort of triangular shaped, and anyone ever see anything like that? Star Trek? Are you kidding me? Oh, come on. Star Trek. Star Trek. Is there a subliminal message in this emblem from the Air Force Space Command? Is that possible? Symbols are important. If you like that, look at this. Over here on the left, we have obviously a star field. Around it, we have these olive leaves, symbol of peace. I would say that would be the peaceful exploration of space. Well, if you take that and add the Star Trek emblem, this is what you come up with. And there are 4 little letters down here, CNSA, the Chinese National Space Administration. What I'm suggesting is that between the Naval Space Command and the Air Force Space Command, this is the current day Space Patrol. Now, in military parlance, when you have 2 or more military services working together as a team, the typical way of naming that team starts with the word joint. So if you ever hear the term JSPACOM, standing for what I would assume to be Joint Space Command, this would be what they're talking about. Now, once again, can you handle the truth? I'm going to take Ben Rich at his word that in 1993, Lockheed Martin had the new technology to go to the stars. And I can speak as an former aerospace engineer that if engineers are given the time and the money, they can take a device, reproduce it using our own materials, and then when they have it, they will perfect it until it works perfectly. And they'll keep improving and improving on it. And I can see no reason why this hasn't already happened. And I'm suggesting we have now a small fleet of starships that are being operated by the Joint Space Command. Now, if you have these devices, let's say you want to build a base on the moon, right? Wouldn't you build a base on the moon if you had interstellar capability? Sure, that'd be the first thing I would do, build a base on the moon. I would also design much bigger devices, maybe large triangular devices to carry crew, consumables, base modules to construct the facility. I would also build a base on Mars. Now, some people may say, well, you know, that can't be. We're landing a Mars rover tomorrow. It's called Curiosity, if you haven't heard about that. Why would we be sending a Mars rover to Mars tomorrow if we already have a base there? Well, number one, it would preserve our current image of technology development that everyone thinks we have. In other words, the space station, the Mars rovers, the former space shuttle, and what have you. We also preserve the secret. And thirdly, we keep a lot of scientists and engineers like myself employed. What I'm suggesting is we already have a base on the moon, a base on the Mars, and according to what Ben Rich said, we have the capability to go to the stars, and I believe we've already done it. Now, to save time, I'm not going to show this video. This was a video that is on the internet at this address. This came from Dr. Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project. This was done in about 2001, I believe, at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. And this image is of Sergeant Carl Wolf. Now, Carl Wolf was in 1965, an Air Force technician. He was an equipment repair technician. And if you'll go to that website, you will hear exactly what he said. In summary, he said, I was on loan from the Air Force to NASA for their Lunar Orbiter program. And he said, I was brought in, he said he had a secret crypto clearance. Now that's going about as high as you can go, by the way. Much higher than my secret clearance, which was just a tad over dog catcher. So that's why I never saw anything like this. He had a crypto clearance. So he was brought into this photographic lab that was processing images from Lunar Orbiter. And he was attempting to fix the equipment. And while he was working, another airman on loan to NASA told him that they had received photographic images of structures on the far side of the moon. This is 1965. He said at that point he was shocked. And then that airman showed him some of the photographs. And these were photographs of towers, mushroom-shaped buildings, spherical structures. And at that point, Sergeant Carl Wolf became fearful because he realized he was being shown sensitive, compartmentalized information, which he shouldn't see. After he recovered from his shock and his fear, he went home that night, and he was expecting to see some big announcement on national television, the news. He didn't see it that night, nor on any other night. But that's his story. Now, I don't know, of course, who built those structures. Somebody did. Let me just sort of summarize what I've explained here. First of all, there are two types of real solid UFOs. The ones that they make and the ones that we make. There are two separate U.S. space programs. The International Space Station, the shuttles, the Mars rovers are all what I call the white space program. This is what the general public has been exposed to for decades. And like I say, this is the one that employs the scientists at NASA, the engineers at Northrop Grumman, wherever. But those engineers may think they're working on the cutting edge of aerospace technology, but they're not. And this happens to be, I will add that this part is what I presented to the American Institute of Aeronautics and Astronautics last year. And I'm told that this created quite a stir, because a lot of engineers don't like to think that they're not on the cutting edge. So there's also a parallel program that I call the Black Space Program, consisting of crashed and recovered UFOs, alien reproduction vehicles, Joint Space Command, and who knows what more. We now have the capability to travel to the stars, and most likely we have already established bases on the moon and Mars. And as it says, over the millennia, Earth has been visited by dozens of extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, time travelers, or whatever. A few of these are benevolent, and a few of them are malevolent. And the rest, in my opinion, and in the opinion of Barbara Lamb, they're neutral. Some neutrals may be attempting to avoid a future Earth catastrophe. Now, one thing I might add, that one of the stories that came out of the Rendlesham Forest story was that these were time travelers from the future, believe it or not. This is one of the stories. This came from an AFOSI interview. Actually, I think it was some kind of therapy session, regression. But these individuals were said to come from the future to harvest human chromosomes so that they could take those chromosomes into the future and change the course of human evolution. You might, if you'd like to know more about that part of the story, it's right in the book. And then lastly, other neutrals, for example, the EBN, are our trading partners. Now, this is just a commercial message here. As I said, this is the Total Novice's Guide to UFOs. When I was at the International UFO Congress, there was a gentleman that came up to my table, and I said, "Have you seen the Total Novice's Guide?" He said, "Oh, I wouldn't be interested in that. I've been studying UFOs for years." he ended up buying the book. And by the way, aren't we all novices? It's just that some of us are less of a novice than others. But no one has all of the answers. Right. Thank you. I have a special offer. I have a few of these to sell. And if you buy this today or tomorrow, you can keep it for 30 days. If you think it's not good value for money, if you think it's not worth it, send it back to me and I will give your money back. And by the way, if you don't want to order it from a small company, order it from Open Minds magazine, and they will offer you the same courtesy in return. Send it back and you'll get your money back. That's the end of my commercial. Are there any questions in the last 6 minutes that we have here? Yes. What do the malevolents do? Well, in my opinion, the malevolents are here possibly to take over the world. I'm not talking about War of the Worlds like Nick Pope described last night, but I'm talking about a slow takeover. You see, if their objective is to take over world domination, the easiest way would be to breed with us in a hybridization program. And gradually, over the years, you'll have a lot of hybrids. And you'll also have a lot of experiencers who may have some kind of post-regression directive. And if you've done this all over the world, as I suspect they may, this could be their agenda. Could be. Anybody else?
If you can make it up to the mic, that would be perfect. I know that you're in the middle of the row. If you hear the question, if you could just repeat it, Mr. Keller, that would be phenomenal.
If they want chromosomes, why do they not just take a cheek swab?
Well, why don't they just take a mouth swab, correct? Instead of, the question was, if these time travelers are here to harvest chromosomes, why don't they take a mouth swab? I'm not a time traveler. I would say how they would harvest chromosomes, it would be up to them. I don't know. I don't honestly know much about biology. I wish I did. I would think that there are many ways of obtaining human chromosomes, if that's in fact true. Anybody else?
Tell us more about J-Rod.
Well, J-Rod was said to be a technician that was given to us. He was housed at S4. He was an Eben. The reason why he was called J-Rod was because they asked him what his name, and my understanding was that he wrote a J and then a bar, and they called it J-Rod. And apparently, at least from the information that I've received, there were more than one J-Rod. In other words, J-Rod 1, J-Rod 2, and that sort of a thing. J-Rod, according to Dan Burish, had some kind of degenerative disease. And according to the Burish story, he was brought on to research this disease and attempt to correct it. Anybody else?
We got a question at the mic.
Where did he come from? Well, he would have been an Eben. I believe the story is that he was from Zeta Reticuli. Now that is a double star, I believe. And of course, there are other reports that other different types of grays also came from that star system. Yes?
Do you think there's
So if you have a question, we only have a couple minutes left on this presentation, so I'm going to get as many questions in as I can, but if you can, just keep in mind, we do ask you to come up to the mic so we can all hear your question and also get it on tape.
Yes, some of us want to express our appreciation that you titled your book as you did instead of The Idiot's Guide to UFOs. But my question for you is, in your research, did you encounter any speculation as to what caused these UFOs to crash, such as the Roswell or some of the others?
Well, there are a couple of stories that I have heard about that. I can only repeat what I've heard. Supposedly, one story was that there was a very high-powered radar station basically situated at the four corners of our states, the Four Corners location, and this radar was said to have interfered with their navigation. Another story was that there was a very heavy rainstorm, thunderstorm that night, and one explanation was that it was hit by a lightning strike and crashed. Yet another story is that there were two craft in the air at the same time, and they collided. I don't know if Stanton Friedman is here. He would be a far better person to ask than I. But those are the three stories that I have heard. Jan.
Hi, Tom. I just wanted to give a plug for your book because I think it's an excellent publication, high quality. I bought a copy of it. It has the entire UFO subject detailed, and it's extremely high quality. I actually gave it to my daughter because she wanted to find out about UFOs. Rather than spend hours explaining things to her, I just said, you should read this book. So, excellent. Question for you. After your presentation to the aerospace engineers, were there anybody come up to you afterwards or have any interesting conversations you could share with us?
Yes. One never knows who might be out there, of course. These were scientists and engineers directly from the aerospace industry. One of them came up to me after my presentation and talked about a large a triangle craft that he had seen personally. And basically, he accepted what I had said. It was interesting also, someone else was there. I think my time is up, isn't it? Okay, there was a gentleman there, a middle-aged gentleman, balding, a little bit maybe younger than I. He sat in the front row of my presentation. He said absolutely nothing. He didn't smile, he didn't frown, he didn't have any body movements per se. And after the presentation, he was just walking across the foyer of the hotel, and I said, say, how did you like my presentation? And he said, oh, I thought that was okay. And then he walked up to me within my personal space. He whispered in my ear and said, I'm from the Skunk Works. And he wasn't joking. He was from the Skunk Works. He was the principal speaker of the entire weekend, and he was the program manager on the new F-35, the version that takes off short takeoff and vertical landing, believe it or not. For why he whispered in my ear, I don't know, but I thought it was an amusing story. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Keller. Thank all of you. We have a 15-minute break. Take this opportunity.